There is a wound you don't talk about because it doesn't bleed in public. A wound that hides behind holidays, behind phone calls that feel heavier than silence, behind smiles that arrive late and leave early. And it hurts in a way nothing else ever has because it didn't come from enemies. It came from the place you were told was safe, the place you were told would always hold you, and that is why you still feel it even now, quietly, long after you told yourself you were over it. You've carried this longer than you admit, and you feel it in the way your chest tightens when their name appears, in the way your body remembers before your mind does. Because betrayal from strangers teaches caution, but betrayal from family teaches something far darker. It teaches you that love itself can be a weapon, that closeness can be leverage, and that the people who know you best also know exactly where to cut. This is the moment your life begins to make sense. Not because the pain goes away, but because you finally stop asking why it hurts so much and start understanding what was really taken from you, what was really broken, and why the wound still whispers, even when the room is quiet. Family betrayal is not loud at first. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives disguised as concern, as advice you didn't ask for, as jokes that land just a little too sharp, as comparisons that feel casual but linger for days. And because you were trained to love before you were trained to protect yourself, you let it pass again and again, telling yourself they didn't mean it, telling yourself you're being sensitive, telling yourself this is just how families are. But Machiavelli understood something most people refuse to see, that the deepest betrayals are never impulsive, they are slow, structural, and rooted in power. Because family is the first hierarchy you ever enter, the first system where roles are assigned without consent, where obedience is rewarded and independence is quietly punished. And when you begin to outgrow the role they gave you, the system reacts. You survive things you still don't have words for. Moments where loyalty was expected from you but never returned. Moments where your success made the room colder, where your boundaries were treated like insults, where your silence was called disrespect. And you learned without realizing it that love in this system was conditional, and the condition was control. This is why it hurts more than anything else. Because you weren't just betrayed by people, you were betrayed by the story you were told about who they were supposed to be, about what family was supposed to mean. And when that story collapses, it takes a part of your identity with it, leaving you questioning not just them, but yourself. You're not broken. You were never taught another way, never taught that closeness does not equal safety, never taught that shared blood does not guarantee shared values, never taught that loyalty demanded is often loyalty exploited. And Machiavelli would say that the greatest mistake a person can make is assuming that proximity creates goodwill, when in truth, proximity often creates entitlement. The closer someone is to you, the more they feel they own a version of you. And when you begin to change, when you begin to grow beyond the version they recognize, they don't see evolution. They see betrayal. And they respond not with honesty, but with subtle sabotage, emotional withdrawal, or moral superiority, all designed to pull you back into alignment. It's okay to feel this, the confusion, the anger, the grief that doesn't have a funeral, because what you lost was not just trust. It was the illusion of unconditional belonging. And illusions die painfully because they were never real enough to say goodbye to. The first psychological shift happens when you stop asking why they did it and start asking what it gave them. Because betrayal is rarely about you, it's about preservation of power. And Machiavelli wrote for rulers. But he was really writing about families, about courts disguised as homes, about alliances disguised as love, about how those closest to power fear losing it the most. When you began to think differently, to move differently, to question traditions that benefited them but cost you, you became unpredictable. And unpredictability terrifies those who rely on control to feel safe, so they corrected you, minimized you, reminded you of your place. Not with force, but with guilt, because guilt is the most efficient leash in a family system. You start to see it now, the patterns that once felt personal, the way support was offered only when you stayed small, the way approval disappeared the moment you asserted yourself, the way your pain was dismissed, but theirs was always urgent. And this is where the shift becomes irreversible, because once you see the structure, you cannot unsee it. Machiavelli would tell you that people do not betray suddenly, They betray when loyalty no longer serves them. And in families, loyalty is often demanded not to protect you, but to protect the hierarchy. And the moment your authenticity threatens that hierarchy, the cost of loving you becomes too high for those who benefit from you staying the same. You're allowed to want more, allowed to want relationships that don't require you to shrink, allowed to want respect that doesn't come with conditions. But this realization brings a new kind of pain, the pain of knowing that no amount of explaining will fix this, because explanation threatens the system even more. So you tried, you explained, you justified, you hoped clarity would save you, but clarity never dismantles a power imbalance. It only exposes it. And when you spoke your truth, you were labeled difficult, dramatic, ungrateful, because systems built on control always punish those who name it. This is where you stop being the child they could manage and become the variable they cannot predict. And this is the moment they begin to fear you, not because you are dangerous, but because you are no longer compliant. And Machiavelli would say that fear is born not from aggression, but from independence. You're not imagining this. The distance, the coldness, the subtle rewriting of events to make you the problem. Because when people cannot control your behavior, they try to control the narrative. And family narratives are the most ruthless of all because they carry history as a weapon. The hidden threat reveals itself when you realize that family betrayal is not always about what they did to you, but about what they were willing to let happen, the silence when you needed defense, the neutrality when harm was obvious, the way peace was valued over truth, and how you were expected to absorb the damage so the image of harmony could survive. Machiavelli warned that those who benefit from a system will always defend it, even at the cost of justice. And in families, the system is often tradition, reputation, or the comfort of denial. And when you disrupt that, you become the threat, not the betrayal itself. This is where the conflict deepens, because now you face a choice that feels impossible: continue sacrificing yourself to maintain access, or accept the loneliness that comes with self-respect. And neither choice feels clean, because one costs your integrity and the other costs your sense of belonging. And the mind will try to convince you that enduring betrayal is the price of love. But here's the forbidden truth, the one no one wants to say out loud, that some people only know how to love versions of you that serve them, and when you outgrow that version, they don't miss you, they miss the control. And Machiavelli would say that love without respect is dependency, not devotion. You feel the predator-prey dynamic shifting now, because once you stop chasing their approval, once you stop explaining your pain, once you stop performing forgiveness to keep the peace, the power begins to move, quietly, invisibly, and they feel it, even if they can't name it, because you are no longer reacting, and reaction was their leverage. Silence becomes dangerous here, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of clarity, the kind that no longer asks to be understood, the kind that no longer negotiates boundaries. And this is where the threat escalates, because people who relied on your emotional availability will escalate when it disappears. They may accuse you of changing, of being cold, of abandoning family. And this is the final test, because defending yourself now would pull you back into the frame they control, and Machiavelli would say that the one who controls the frame controls the outcome. So you stand still, not because you don't care, but because you finally care about yourself enough to stop bleeding for people who call it love. And this stillness feels terrifying at first because you were trained to equate love with sacrifice. But sacrifice without reciprocity is not love. It is exploitation wearing a familiar face. This is the moment your life begins to make sense, because you see that the pain was not proof that you were weak. It was proof that you were human in a system that punished humanity, and now the real journey begins. Not toward revenge, not toward reconciliation, but toward a power that does not need permission. There is a moment after betrayal when the noise fades, when the arguments stop replaying and the silence feels heavier than any confrontation. And this is where the core revelation waits, not as a dramatic realization, but as a quiet truth that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. You begin to see that what hurt the most was never the event itself, never the words spoken or the lines crossed, but the expectation that was violated, The unspoken contract you believed existed simply because you shared blood, history, or a name. And Machiavelli would say that expectations are the most dangerous form of vulnerability because they give power to people who never earned it. You gave them access before they proved they could handle it. And that doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human because you were taught that family was exempt from the rules of power, that love neutralized self-interest. But the forbidden truth is that self-interest does not disappear in families. It simply hides behind obligation. This is where you pause and feel it fully, not to drown in it, but to finally name it, because naming something removes its ability to control you unconsciously. And you realize that betrayal was the moment you stopped being useful in the way they needed, stopped fitting into the role that kept the system stable, and the punishment was emotional distance, guilt, or rejection. You're allowed to want more than that, allowed to want relationships that don't require you to betray yourself to be included. And as you sit with this, you may notice a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for what you hoped they would be, and relief because you no longer have to keep pretending this was love when it felt like survival. If this resonates, if you feel this tightening in your chest like something long unspoken has finally been acknowledged, it's okay to sit with it, to reflect on where you learned to confuse loyalty with self-erasure, and to notice how many choices you made just to avoid rocking the boat. Because awareness is not the end, it's the opening. You don't need to announce this shift, don't need to convince anyone, because the most powerful changes happen quietly. And if you find yourself drawn to understand this dynamic more deeply, to explore how power hides in the places we're told not to question, you already know where to stay, where to listen, where to keep walking with this awareness. Now come the emotional micro moments, the small, almost invisible shifts that begin to change everything. Like the first time you don't answer a call right away and notice the world doesn't end. The first time you say no without explaining yourself and feel both terror and freedom collide in your chest. You notice how your body reacts differently now. Less braced, less tense, as if it's slowly realizing it no longer has to be on constant alert. And this is when the past tries to pull you back. Not with logic, but with memory, reminding you of good times, shared laughter, moments that make you doubt yourself because power never releases its grip without one last illusion. You survive things you still don't have words for, including the internal war between honoring your truth and honoring your conditioning. And in these moments, the urge to return, to smooth things over, to sacrifice yourself again for the comfort of familiarity can feel overwhelming. This is where Machiavelli's cold clarity becomes a lifeline, because he understood that mercy given too early reinforces the behavior that caused the harm, and that distance is not punishment, it is information. Information about who respects your boundaries when there are consequences, and who only respected you when there were none. You begin to notice who reaches out with curiosity and who reaches out with control, who asks how you are versus who demands your availability. And these small observations accumulate, quietly rewriting your understanding of loyalty, teaching you that true connection does not panic when you assert independence. It's okay to feel this, the sadness, the anger, the strange emptiness where obligation used to live, because that emptiness is not loss, it is space. Space for relationships that don't require you to bleed to belong, space for a self that doesn't need permission to exist. And in these micro moments, something else happens. Something subtle but irreversible. You stop seeing yourself as the problem that needs fixing and start seeing the system that required your silence to function. You walk into a room where their voices used to dictate your mood, and now you feel the difference immediately. The air still heavy, but your spine a little straighter, your breath a little deeper, because you are no longer entering as prey, hoping not to be noticed. You are entering as someone who sees the dynamics clearly. You feel the old triggers try to activate, the tone that once made you shrink, the comment designed to test your boundaries, and instead of reacting, you notice, you observe, you let the moment pass without feeding it, and this is where the power shift becomes visible. Not to them yet, but to you. You notice how silence changes the room, how not rushing to explain creates discomfort for those who relied on your defensiveness, and you feel the predator-prey reversal settling in, because awareness is a weapon and you are no longer wielding it against yourself. You're not imagining this, the way they seem slightly off balance now, the way their usual tactics don't land the same way, because you are no longer emotionally predictable. And Machiavelli would say that unpredictability is the beginning of sovereignty. You feel the weight of choice now, not the false choice between loyalty and abandonment, but the real choice between repeating a cycle and ending it. And as you stand there, grounded in your body, you realize that you don't need to win, don't need to confront, don't need to prove anything, because power is no longer something you seek from them. You walk away from the interaction unchanged, not triumphant, not defeated, just clear. And that clarity follows you, reshaping how you move through every relationship, every boundary, every silence. The unresolved threads remain deliberately because not everything is meant to be closed neatly, and family betrayal rarely offers clean endings, only thresholds you cross without ceremony. You may still wonder if reconciliation is possible, if distance is permanent, if they will ever understand, and these questions linger, not as weaknesses, but as reminders that you are human, capable of holding complexity without surrendering yourself to it. Machiavelli would warn you not to confuse hope with strategy, because hoping someone will change without evidence keeps you tethered to the same power dynamic. And true freedom comes not from answers, but from alignment with your own values. You begin to sense that the final transformation is approaching, not yet, but soon, where your silence is no longer defensive but declarative, where your absence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could, and where the need for their validation dissolves entirely. For now, you hold the awareness, the distance, the quiet strength that comes from seeing clearly, knowing that every predator has a predator, and that the most dangerous shift is not becoming harder, but becoming unreachable to those who only knew how to love you when you were small. Something changes when you stop waiting for an apology that will never come, when you stop hoping for understanding from people who benefit from misunderstanding you, and the rhythm of your life begins to shift in ways that feel subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like a door closing softly behind you while you're still looking forward. This is the rhythm break, the moment where the old emotional tempo no longer applies, where the constant anticipation of their reaction fades, and in its place grows a stillness that feels unfamiliar but grounded, because you are no longer orienting your decisions around how they will feel, how they will judge, or how they will rewrite the story afterward. The silence becomes different now, not heavy, not accusatory, but clean, spacious, and slightly dangerous, because you are no longer explaining your absence, no longer filling gaps with justification. And this creates suspense in the system you left behind. They start to feel it before they understand it. The way your energy no longer leaks back toward them. The way your name no longer arrives wrapped in emotional labor. And this unsettles them, because systems depend on predictability, and you have removed yourself from the pattern. You feel the rising tension, not outside, but inside. The tension of standing fully in your own authority for the first time. Because when you stop being prey, you don't instantly become a predator. You become something far more destabilizing, someone who no longer plays the game at all. And Machiavelli would say this is where real power begins. Not when you confront, not when you dominate, but when your absence forces others to confront the void they created. You don't announce this transformation, you don't post about it, you don't explain it to those who wouldn't understand anyway. You simply begin to move differently, speak less, choose more carefully, and this is how influence works when it's woven invisibly into your presence. People notice the change without being able to name it. The way you no longer seek permission, the way your boundaries arrive without negotiation, and this creates a quiet authority that doesn't demand attention but commands it, because you are no longer trying to be seen as good, only as whole. You begin to recognize this pattern everywhere now, in other people, in other systems. How power hides behind obligation, how guilt is used to maintain control, how silence can either enslave or liberate depending on who chooses it. And this awareness stays with you, reshaping how you navigate every relationship from this point forward. You're not imagining this. The sense that something fundamental has shifted, that you are standing on the other side of a threshold you can never uncross. Because once you see how deeply betrayal is tied to power, You cannot go back to pretending it was just a misunderstanding. And if you find yourself drawn to continue exploring this way of seeing, this way of understanding the hidden mechanics beneath relationships, it's because awareness has momentum, and once it starts moving, it rarely stops on its own. The most dangerous truth is this: family betrayal doesn't break you, it reveals you. And once revealed, you can never again be controlled by the same illusions that once kept you compliant. Click on the screen to watch the next video on how this knowledge changes what happens next, what most people never realize after this moment, and what you will start seeing differently from now on.